afternoon, and welcome to another episode of The Real Thomas Jefferson. Today, featuring philosophical conversations with Thomas Jefferson. The theme of this show is to get better acquainted with Thomas Jefferson as a philosopher, and through that, perhaps better get acquainted with ourselves. I'm your host, George Gorey, formerly a captain with the California Highway Patrol and currently a criminal investigator at a local district attorney's office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. Holochuk, is a professor of philosophy and history who taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, and Rutgers University Camden. He is the author, editor of over 70 books and nearly 400 published essays, both formal and informal, on topics such as ethics, ancient philosophy, science, psychoanalysis, and critical thinking. His current research is on Thomas Jefferson. He is acknowledged by many scholars to be the world's foremost authority and has published over 300 essays, formal and informal, and has 30 books on Thomas Jefferson. He also writes about Ukraine. Today, we will discuss the Colonel's newest book, Thomas Jefferson and His Younger Brother, A Study in Cosmopolitanism and Parochialism. Good afternoon, Colonel. How are you?
I'm fine. Here's a copy of my book here. I don't know if it comes up.
Yep, can see it.
Yeah, I like what they did with the cover. You have a copy of it now, and yeah, so well, let's get rocking on it right now.
All right. Well, question number one is, what made you write a book about the letters? There are only 32 exchanges in their lifetime between Thomas Jefferson and his brother Randolph. As you mentioned in your book, that two books have already been written. So, what made you write this book?
Well, like I said, what makes write any book? Thomas Jefferson, like I said, I have 30 books. This is the 29th book on Jefferson, and published. That one is still yet to be published. The American Revolution without Thomas Jefferson. And there are usually a couple of reasons why I do to write another book on Jefferson. There's a lot of redundancy in my books, obviously, but oftentimes there's just some things about him I don't know. There's a sort of a gap in my understanding of, for example, when I went to France, the 5 years he was there, and I read a few books on that, and I wanted to rectify that defect by writing a book on Jefferson's Parish. Here's what did he do there, what happened while he was there, and so forth. In this case, we have, as you mentioned, two books already, one of which was by Bernard Mayo in 1942. I do have my Colonel pin on there. You didn't notice that, did you?
You are the Colonel.
All right. And the one you gave me. And Virginia, Bernard Mayo wrote collected 28 of the 32 letters and published them in a book. And it was a very short book. And he devoted in an introduction 4 pages to the life of Randolph Jefferson, which is pretty meager. He says the letters treat of family and agricultural matters and in some degree enlarge one's knowledge of Jefferson's domestic life. But they're primarily interesting because they reveal Thomas Jefferson's affection, patient kindness, and desire to help a brother strikingly inferior. He says Randolph Jefferson was an earthbound farmer. And this has been the received view, forever. Dumas Malone repeats it, and others will talk about that Jefferson was intellectually inferior and so forth. There was a brotherly or familial relationship and kindness between the brothers, but no real fraternal closeness. And I agree with that. In 2012, Joanne Yeck published The Jefferson Brothers, and she posed a challenge to the received view. Now, she's not a trained scholar. She's an independent scholar, which puts you at a disadvantage right off the bat. Secondly, the book was independently published. She was self-published, so she published it through her own publishing company, as it were. She devotes 450 pages to the life of Randolph. How do you go from 4 to 450 pages? So there's this tremendous gap. And if Yeck's thesis is right, the C view put forth by Mayo and others is wrong. And Yeck argues that Randolph Jefferson, was a sort of ordinary planter in Virginia. He was not stupid, not mentally defective, not challenged. She said Thomas Jefferson for a brother who wouldn't come in a poor second. So she wants to argue that he was an historically relevant person, significant person, and as successful as the next Virginian plaintiff. Okay, so between having 4 pages on the one hand and having 450 pages, that something's got to be wrong. Either Yeck is her book is really far off, or Mayo's really far off, and not understanding that there's not much more to say about Randolph Jefferson. So I wanted to rectify that, come to some sort of agreement between the two, or either side with one or the other when I wrote this book. That was the motivation. A lot of fun to write.
Well, and you alluded to just a minute ago in question number 2. It's been stated by scholars that Randolph was mentally challenged. One, is that true? And does that relate to your choice of the title?
Yeah, the choice of the title is Thomas, as you see, Thomas Jefferson and his younger brother, A Study in Cosmopolitanism and Parochialism. Now, that's as fatuous of fucking title as you can get. It's also an exercise of my sesquipedality. I don't know what that word means either, but I'm exercising it when I chose the title. But yeah, it's agreeing with Mayo that Jefferson had a unbelievably cosmopolitan mind. Cosmopolitanism comes from the cosmos meaning the whole, an ordered thing. We call it today our cosmos. And politanism is from the Greek word polis, which means a city-state, where the cosmos itself is your city-state. When one has a mind so deep and broad like Thomas Jefferson, the cosmos itself is your city, right? You can't live in one. He's a philosopher, in other words. And parochialism is the sort of narrow life that Randolph lived. Randolph, Mayo is right to say, struggled mightily living. And Thomas Jefferson says, and I'll come to this appropriate time in the deposition after Randolph dies, that he contacted me for all significant matters concerning his own affairs. And I'll read you a couple letters as we go on to show that Randolph was Yeck, against Yeck. He was mentally challenged, I think. I think it's clear.
And that seems to be the tenor of the letters, right?
Yeah, let me read these 2 quotes right now as it is. I just think it's probably appropriate. He said, in his deposition after Randolph days, Randolph was always in the habit of consulting Thomas in all cases. He's talking about himself in third person, all cases of importance, respecting his interest. And Jefferson adds, the sole exception was that of his last marriage, of which he never spoke to him until after its consummation. So he married his second wife, who was much younger than he was, 20 plus years younger. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And he did not ask Jefferson's permission for the first time in his life, or Thomas Jefferson's advice. And we'll get to a little bit more about his second wife, who was a bit of a shrew, I guess. And Jefferson, to talk about Randolph's mental deficiency, I'll just read to you the first letter between the two. All right, there's this January 11th letter, 1789, the first letter between the two brothers. And I'll read the occurrence of this part of the globe. Jefferson is saying this while he's minister plenipotentiary in France. Occurrences of this part of the globe are of a nature to interest you so little that I've never made them the subject of a letter to you. And he says another discouragement is the distance and the time that a letter would take to send from Paris all the way to Randolph's residence at the time. That says everything about the relationship, that his brother could be in one of the most important posts of an American delegate or politician of the young nation, and yet Thomas Jefferson doesn't feel the need to say anything about what he's doing to his brother. And the reality there is because his brother has no interest in what's going on. I'll read later another letter from Randolph to the effect that when a sibling dies, a female sister, I'll read a copy of the letter, but Randolph just doesn't show any loss he basically says, well, we all have to die. Then he goes on to talk about himself. Now, he's not a irretrievable narcissist in the way our president is. It's just that he is, when you read his letters carefully, study them psychoanalytically, you realize he's just a person who is having utmost trouble in just managing his plantation, right?
Managing everyday life.
Yeah, managing everyday life. And he came into some wealth. We'll talk about that. I should show you. Let me bring up through screen share a map that I showed you before we talked about. So I have a map, and if you follow my cursor, we see Jefferson's Monticello. You see where Jefferson was born, Shadwell. When that burns down, Jefferson is still a youth. Thomas Jefferson inherits the property, decides on the property here by the Rivanna River where he builds his Monticello, right? And then Randolph gets the property here, and I'll scoot up just a little bit, just south of Scotts. And you see how the James River bends. And this peninsula here is all Randolph Jefferson's land. It's very, very fertile land, very good land, but it's quite a distance away from Jefferson at where his Monticello will be. It's quite a distance away from where Randolph was born. And the route would be some 20 miles between the two brothers. And 20 miles traveled with a horse and buggy is a considerable distance. Would take all day for the most part. And so it's traversable as it, and we have every reason to believe that Randolph visited often his brother. Say more of that in a bit. So I chose the title "A Study in Cosmopolitanism and Parochialism" because while Jefferson was a very cosmopolitan thinker, his brother was a very, and I use parochial in its most narrow sense. He was confined to his own plantation at Snowden and doing what he could just not to drown there, needing his brother's help every bit of the way.
Struggling to manage his own affairs, probably on a daily basis.
Yeah, sure.
And then on number three, or question number three, is you note in your preface that most Jeffersonian biographers have little to say about Randolph Jefferson. Merrill Peterson, you note, in his 1,000-page biography, devotes one sentence to Randolph Jefferson, which is, quote, "With his only brother, Randolph, so much younger, he was never close," unquote. Why have other scholars neglected this relationship in documenting Thomas Jefferson's life?
Because his younger brother, in some sense, was a non-entity, or that's too strong, non-factor in his life. He had a relationship out of necessity simply because it was his brother, but Jefferson was a high intellectual, and his brother's lack of intellect, his brother being mentally challenged, made it very, very difficult for Thomas to be close to him. And I'm not trying to denigrate Thomas Jefferson in any way, shape by saying these things. It's just, I think, such a high and broad-minded thinker would have a hard time forging a close relationship with a brother who was dim-witted. Again, the same holds for Sally Hemings. We don't know whether she was literate and probably of limited intelligence, and Jefferson's going to fall for her. He couldn't even have a relationship with his brother, like someone who's related to him by blood, because, so everything that Peterson says is spot on. He was never close. He couldn't be close. So are biographers at fault for not saying much about it? I don't think so. I just don't think that his relationship with his brother was much of a factor in the development of the important aspects of his life, his mind, his thinking. I don't know if you have any disagreement with that.
I think that the wide gap in intelligence of many people can be a stumbling block. It doesn't mean they can't be friends or they can't associate, or many people have family members like that. But some people, and we were talking about it before the show, they kind of, and I don't mean this in a denigrating matter about Randolph or anybody else. Some people operate on a very basic level, basics in life that we all need: food, shelter, love, family, and they're not able, or they're not capable, many times. And I think with Randolph, that was the case of thinking beyond that. And then you get the people at the other side of the spectrum, like Jefferson's highly intellectual, cosmopolitan, forward thinking, broadly global thinking, for lack of a better word. He's not going to have anything in common with somebody like that. And even though he is his brother and probably cared about him, I just see that as something that I would consider that relatively normal in life.
Yeah,
I
I think
just
that
don't see
happens. I agree with you. I think that happens to all sorts of people all times when there's a wide gap in intelligence. There's there are difficulties in two people forming any kind of intimate relationship or friendship.
that.
It just can't happen. The things in which I'm interested are not the things in which you're interested. One
Exactly.
person's interested in Mozart and Vivaldi, another person's interested in tractor trailer crashes and races and stuff. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. Just people that have different levels that just don't meet too easily. So
I
I
think
don't
that
have
was
much to
clearly what was
say
going
on
on
that.
here.
Yeah, I don't have much to say on that other than I think he just was incapable of having a close relationship with him. And again, let's apply that to Sally Hemings as well. It's another good reason why he had no interest in any relationship with her.
Oh, and looking at question number 4 and looking at your book, what other significant disclosures other than Randolph Jefferson being mentally challenged did you discover?
Well, there are a lot of things I state that Yeck states as well. I mean, let's give her her due. She goes on and writes. I haven't said anything about her book. She goes on and writes 450 pages, and there's a lot to say about some of the things that we know about Randolph Jefferson. Uh, in condemnation of her self-published book, one of the things I'll say is that she doesn't give us much. I'll talk about some of her disclosures, my disclosures, some of which are based on things she said. Jefferson was born 1755. Thomas Jefferson, 1743. Is 12-year difference. He dies predeceases his brother. He dies in 1815. He goes just like Thomas. He has the same opportunities for education of William and Mary in 1772 and doesn't even last a year there. Why does he leave William and Mary? I think we don't really know, but I think Thomas and he decided it's just not working out. He's not learning anything. In Detroit terms, he ain't getting his learn on. So let's pull him out of there. He's wasting his time, wasting money. He was a fiddler. We know that. How good was he as a fiddler? We know that he used to hang around the slave quarters, according to one of the slaves, and play fiddle and sing, dance, and play the fiddle to all hours of the night. He supported the American Revolution, probably because at the urging of his brother Thomas, troops would travel by the James River, and they would pass through his headquarters. He would often give food and assistance to the revolutionists. He married Anne Nancy Lewis, and he married her. She was born in 1755. He married her in 1781. She was born the same age. His second wife, Mitchie Ballow Pryor, whom Randolph married without Thomas Jefferson's approval or knowing anything about it. He marries her around 1809, moves into the household. She was born in 1780, so there is a 25-year gap between the two. She, from what we know, was a handsome woman, very ambitious, and the children, Randolph's kids, who were all slightly younger than she was, were any of them fooling around with her? She lived in the house. There was a lot of tension between them. Now, was that tension caused because there was sexual activity between some of the sons and their new mother? We don't know. I mean, I can speculate. It may seem crass of me or even crude of me to suggest that, but those things happen, right? We talk about the possibility of Thomas Jefferson fooling around with slaves. Those happen between master and slave, so we need to investigate that and rule that out. Mm-hmm. So I think that there was some likelihood that there was involvement because there was a tension between at least two of the sons, and her. And she was, a gold digger. She was looking to inherit, the land. And upon the death of Randolph, she was hoping to inherit everything. Things didn't work out that way. So one of the most significant disclosures is just that Randolph Jefferson, Hake, Yeck's book, Yeck's thesis, was not very intelligent. And I'll I'll read this, and I'll post this in the video so people can follow along. They can see the text. He said that with spelling mistakes, he says, I received this is on 1811. Randolph is right to Thomas. I received yours on the 26th, should be 26th of last month, and am extremely sorry to hear of my sister's death, and would have been over, but it was not rally in my power, but it is what we may all expect to come to either later or sooner. I got Mr. Pryor. Notice there are no periods used at all.
No punctuation whatsoever.
No, I got Mr. Pryor, one of Mitchie's brothers, to call and leave this letter for me as he was going to Albemarle Court, and recommended it to him to make Monticello his first day's stage. I intend coming over sometime next month, which I expect will be towards the last of the month, as I shall be very busy getting my crop of wheat down to Richmond and sowing my present crop. You see, will not forget to take care of my puppy if you have not given him away to anyone. I expect by this time he must be large. I have just got over a very severe tack, not attack, but tack of gravel, kidney stones. I could not have survived many hours, OURS, had I not got relief from a physician immediately. My wife, here we have punctuation, a colon. We have no periods. All of this is my wife and family presents, without the E, their respects to you and family. I am yours. And he signs it Randolph. He signs RJ, just like Jefferson signs TJ. Now, I'll post this, like I said, so viewers can see. This is one sentence. So, I mean, psychologically, it's a giant sentence, and he jumps from subject to subject. He goes away from his sister's death and immediately turns to things that are related to him. Not because he's narcissistic and does not care, but he's incapable of understanding probably the whole issue of death. Everybody has to die. That's what I think he said. We may all expect to come to either later or sooner, right? We all die. So let's get back to my stuff. No periods, right?
Nothing.
Right, and I talk about this in the book. People, like Yeck, don't analyze stuff like this. Nobody's analyzing. You got to look at this. What does this mean that there are no punctuation marks, that it's one large sentence, and it doesn't even end with a period? Is that his mind goes from topic to topic to topic to topic, and there's no connection between the topics. He's functioning at the level maybe of a 5-year-old or something. Right? He's capable of doing things because he's a full-grown, physically strong man. But, the lack of being able to spell, it just tells you everything why he didn't last at William and Mary. Right? It'd be like trying to educate a donkey. It doesn't work. You're wasting your time. And he doesn't take any, pride in writing, crafting beautiful sentences and constructing sentences that cohere. And the mind shifts from topic to topic to topic to topic. It's extraordinary. I mean, you see that before you.
It's very adolescent and childlike in its tone, and the lack of punctuation. It's really like you read it slowly, which was good because it's really hard to keep up with because he changes topics one after the other, from the gravel to this or that.
Yeah, he's talking about his bitch and gravel, kidney stones,
dog, right?
Everything. And it's just like, you wonder what Thomas thinks when he gets a letter from him. It's like, oh my God, here we go again. What's going to go on with this? And he's going to mention 14 different problems that he has that I have to try to solve or help him solve. And where's any of this going? So it's just, I'm not making fun of Randolph. It's
the
just
truth.
Yeah, he was mentally challenged. We have every reason to believe against Yeck in her thesis that he was a normal Virginian plantation owner. He was only seemed to be dumb. Because, no, he was dumb, right?
He
And
was.
Thomas went out of his way to help his brother as much as he could, insofar as he was involved with so many other things. And I don't think he felt filial duty towards his brother, but no profound or intense love. I think that was too hard to do.
That's how I read it.
Yeah, they're too different.
Almost like a father figure.
He was a father figure, and the son here, which is Jefferson's younger brother, was like a young boy who was capable of growing up. At least with a son. If I'm a father, you have what, 2 sons?
Yes.
Yeah, when they're young, you guide them and help them as much, and you hope that guidance turns in it blossoms into when they become men where they're self-sufficient and more than capable of handling their own affairs. Doesn't happen here with Randolph, if I'm correct in my thesis.
It makes sense why that woman, Mitchie, latched on to him knowing that he owned a plantation. She also was probably quite astute, seeing he wasn't that intelligent.
No,
Easy to fool.
but presumably the sons, as I say in the book, were sharp enough. They were sharp enough to know that she's butting in. She's looking to, and what she tried to do is that upon his passing, push the sons out of their inheritance. And there's all sorts of problems with that. These are problems I discuss in the book. But she was, you can't think that she was in love with him. She was, we talked about how she would use his name to buy all sorts of things at the local store, probably in Scottsville. And that was creating all sorts of financial problems. Randolph would write Thomas about all the problems he's having. And Thomas was never one to interfere in stuff. He didn't want to interfere. And at one point, Mitchie even writes Thomas Jefferson to talk about, well, he can't manage his own affairs. I need you to talk to him or get involved in this. And Jefferson just refused to do anything, to his credit. She wanted him to
Let
take
Randolph solve his own problems.
Well, she wanted Thomas to be on her side so she can come in and run the affairs, and Thomas wouldn't let that happen. So it's all talked about in the book. It's really fascinating, a story, all things considered.
Very interesting. And so we touched on this a little bit last week, I think. We've touched on it in other programs, but what, if any, is Randolph's, this is question 5, what, if any, is Randolph's connection to the Thomas Jefferson Sally Hemings controversy?
Yeah, I'd forgotten how much I wrote about this in the book because it ties in. There's a scant correspondence between the two brothers, and there's a large gap in it from 1792 to 1807. So one of the questions you ask as an historian, as a scholar, why is there a gap? What causes the gap? Where's Thomas Jefferson? Well, Thomas Jefferson comes back from Paris to the United States late in 1789. He's back here. He's in New York in Washington's cabinet from the early parts of this time, and he's president of the United States in 1807, within travelable distance from Washington to Monticello. So there's not one letter till 1807. And the question is, if Randolph is really, as I said, so dependent on Thomas Jefferson to manage his own affairs, why is there a gap in the correspondence? What do you think my answer is?
Instead of writing him a letter, he just went and saw him.
He went and saw him.
Anytime
It's
he
a
came back.
20-mile drive. It's a day's drive to get down there, and he could stay and discuss his affairs with Thomas Jefferson. You don't have to have letters. So, I mean, Jefferson's not writing always about any of these things in his account book. Why do you have to write when your brother just happens to stop over? Do I have to put that down? Is it something that needs to be accounted for unless there's a big problem, financial issue to be solved? So we don't know. I mean, you look at it, Sally Hemings had children in 1795. Remember, the gap is from 1792 to 1807. Her kids were born in 1795. After the gap, 3 years, 1798, 1799, 1801, 1805, which is Madison, right? And the gap is till 1807. And then 1808 is Eston. So how do we not know? Right? This fits neatly if Randolph is coming up, traveling north to Monticello often during Jefferson's political years to visit his brother. When his brother is home, and his brother was home quite often, that could very easily account for Sally Hemings' pregnancies if Randolph was the father. Not saying Randolph was, but it fits the narrative. Now, let's see. Yeah, I say in the book, Randolph visits Thomas at Monticello quite often to glean advice. That's confirmed by Thomas's entries in his memorandum book, 1792 to 1807. There are entries February 26, 1797, June 11, 1798, October 1, 1798, August 1, 1801, September 21, 1802, April 14, 1803, and November 5, 1806, where he does mention Randolph visiting, right? There's a transaction of business between the brothers. There probably were many other visits where, he doesn't log into his account book. So we do have accounts of, you want to do scholarship the right way. You have to go do the dirty work and look in account books and see if there's anything about Randolph, which I did. Now, what does the Thomas Jefferson Foundation say? They say, really, there's not much, or there's no evidence there's no written evidence of Randolph visiting during this large gap. Because there's no evidence, we can say he didn't visit, right? Which is in philosophy, the argumentum ad ignorantiam. There's no evidence of X, so we can conclude not X, right? There's no evidence that so-and-so did not murder the person, so we must assume that he did murder the person, right? Lack of evidence is lack of evidence. Lack of evidence is not evidence for anything. Lack of evidence for not X is not evidence for X. It's just a lack. And a lack proves nothing. And I'll read to you, lastly, what the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, they go out of their way to really push this Jefferson screwed Sally Hemings narrative and had 6 children by her. They say there's no surviving correspondence between the brothers from 1792 to 1807. Lack of correspondence, right? Which we know. Thomas Jefferson's 2 surviving letters of 1807, which expressed the hope that his brother would visit Monticello during his spring and late summer vacations, suggest that similar invitations were extended in the preceding years. The correspondence also suggests that Randolph Jefferson may not always have acted on these invitations. So it suggests that Thomas Jefferson offered invitations for his brother, perhaps verbal, but it also suggests that he might not always have acted. How does it suggest? In his post-1807 letters, ill health, the poor state of the roads, and other circumstances were often cited as reasons to postpone his Monticello visits. In fact, his only recorded Monticello visits this period were made on his own business and not at his brother's invitation. So they're going out of their way just to say they didn't have a correspondence between these years, so Randolph didn't visit. Or if he did, he didn't visit often. So you're going to tell me that between, this, what is it, a 15-year span of time, Randolph just didn't come to see his brother. And that's just too big of a stretch. And this is just typical.
That sounds highly unusual, as dependent as he was on it.
Yeah, and this is prior to him marrying Mitchie. Mitchie was around 1809, from what I could gather. The gap, is prior to meeting Mitchie. And you could see that once he's meeting Mitchie, he might not have any reason to, because Mitchie's trying to run the show, but he does write to him. But he's probably, I think what's going on is he's visiting Jefferson quite a bit. I would assume visiting Sally Hemings quite a bit, having, as we say in the vernacular, some nookie with Sally Hemings. In that time, the births of the children fit that time frame. In 1808, he meets Mitchie. In 1809, his wife dies well before that. Everything fits neatly with the possibility of Randolph Jefferson being the father of all of Sally Hemings' children, or at least some of them. We can't rule that out. But of course, Monticello rules it out categorically. We can dismiss the qualifying remarks and we can just state Thomas Jefferson fathered the kids. So it's a story, and I had forgotten after having written this, just how much I had to say about Randolph Jefferson, his strange life, and the possibility of him being the father. And I think it's a neat read for that reason alone, if not for other instances of Thomas. Thomas Jefferson had a sister too who died, who was very mentally challenged, and she died early on, drowning in a river with the person who was attending to her during a storm or something like that. So it's funny that Thomas, he had one other sister, I think it was Jane, an older sister who was highly intelligent. Jefferson was very, very attracted to her, and she died. He was broken. His sister died, and he wrote some beautiful laudatory words upon her death. But she was highly intelligent. She was very musical, and he enjoyed spending time with her, and she with him. Right. So, anyways, I had a hell of a time writing the book, and I know you just got it. Hopefully, you'll have time to read through the letters and
I will.
form your own opinions on these things. And that's what we always invite people to do, not to agree with me or you necessarily, but to take what we have to say and then investigate these things on your own and see if you agree and come to the same conclusions or you have different conclusions. But the idea of the show is just to be pulled around by the hair by evidence, not by surmise, not by possible scenarios. Let's look at the facts and see where the facts lead us.
What is interesting, Monticello or the Thomas Jefferson Foundation's mentality there is just when you read that last part, it's like this categorical denial, which is absurd. It shows they put no research, whether they're intellectually lazy, and plus they have an agenda, plus they make a lot of money. It's very, very plausible that Randolph and or his children, which he had, I think, several sons, could have easily fathered Sally Hemings' children. And it's amazing how that's not even taken into account whatsoever, because it doesn't fit the narrative, and it wouldn't.
They don't even say, this bothers me. They don't even say it's possible. It's clearly possible
at all.
Do we know? We don't know, but it would fit the Y chromosome, story that we have. But they won't even acknowledge the possibility. They just write it out. It's just you want to talk about apologism for a thesis. They're wedded to this Sally Hemings thesis. Makes them look as if they're champions of Black rights, and they're trying to make Sally Hemings into this great historical figure. That's what I had. See, Yeck doesn't even do that with Randolph. All Yeck was trying to do, and I applaud her. She works real hard in her book. The point is, she gives us too little factual data for drawing conclusions. I didn't talk about it, but I'll say a couple things before we get off here. What I found off-putting with her book to a little bit is that she would say, well, we don't know anything about Randolph's interests or his time at what he probably did on a daily basis, but we know that he knew so-and-so and so-and-so from Willie and Mary, and so-and-so left a diary. We can read that person's diary, look at the things they did, and infer from that Randolph did the same things. No, you can't. I mean, you're in law enforcement. You just can't do that. You can say, yeah. But then given the evidence I just showed you that the guy couldn't even craft a letter, that his mind wanders from topic to topic, can't stay focused on anything, we can't conclude anything about that. So anyways,
like we were talking about earlier, I think for Randolph, daily life was probably a struggle. It usually is for people like that. Probably quite difficult.
Well, running a damn plantation, a large plantation like Monticello or Snowden would be difficult enough if you have your full faculties. Because there are always problems. If there's drought in the summer or there's flooding, you can lose your crop. And when do you bring it to market? What are the market rates, the prices, this and that? What is the competition like this year? And all these things to consider. And if you're mentally challenged to any extent, this is just going to magnify the difficulties that you'll face.
It's a fascinating topic because it is interesting. You see this in a lot of families where there's multiple children. You'll see somebody who is a high intellect, highly intelligent, and then it's very strange how nature distributes the talents. A lot of times you'll see in these families somebody like Randolph, mentally challenged, has maybe a autism spectrum disorder, or has some other mentally challenged issue that makes them mentally challenged, and then you'll have this high intellect. It's Interesting. And I could see that happening here. Here's you
Well,
got one man who has this incredibly high IQ, and then the brother who does not.
it's the milkman hypothesis, right? For the mentally challenged
Right.
one, or the local professor comes over to visit the man's
Yeah.
wife, talk about the son's education and whatever. So I'm teasing here, but yeah, there were, Thomas just, and his sister Jane, who knows what she would have been like, things would have been like had she lived. Every indication, we don't have a lot of evidence, every indication for what he says about her death broke him, because she was the type of woman that he would have been attracted to. Very musical, very talented, highly intelligent, right? And again,
High intellect.
I want to iterate, I want to ingeminate that this is another strike against the Sally Hemings hypothesis. She was nothing like any of that. And however cute she might have been, however white looking she might have been, she didn't have those other things that Mariah Cosway had, that his wife had, that attracted him to those types of females. We don't have a topic for next week, do we? I was thinking of something, but
No, we don't.
we'll come up with some. I'm going to blame that on you because you were busy this week. Can I do that?
You can.
I can do that. You'll take that from me.
That's fine. That's fine.
We'll have
That's not a
something.
problem.
I just finished up a draft of my book on the philosophical conversations between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. That's sent out to the publisher today. Perhaps we'll do something from that. I had something.
That would be great.
Yeah. If not, if you have something, we'll come up with something interesting again. And plug my book. I do have 3 additional copies for sale. If anybody's interested, that anybody wants an autographed copy, I'll gladly do that. And other than that, I'll see you later, partner. Thank you for sharing another wonderful episode.
Course.
And keep that.
We'll be in touch for next week.
Keep that heart in San Francisco.
That's it. TTFN, right?
That's TTFN. As Catwoman said, the Batwoman. That's where it comes from.